And I wanted to let you all know, we are recording this webinar. For those of you who may not know me, I am Mabel Lamb, Executive Director of the Sherman Park Community Association, and we welcome you to our Eco Neighborhood webinar. And tonight's webinar is going to be on garden hibernation. So it's time to put your gardens to bed. And tonight we're going to cover some topics like covering your crops for raised garden beds, your rain barrels and disconnection ideas, shredding your leaves and garden materials for compost and plant cover, and then also proper materials for your curb leaf pickup and a pickup schedule. So tonight's presenters will be Lauren Poppin, she is a resident of Sherman Park, as well as Steve O'Connell, who's one of our residents of Sherman Park. Both Lauren and Steve are our eco ambassadors. And then we will also have some special comments from Ann Knadler. And Ann is also a eco ambassador as well. So I'd like to give a special thanks to Ben Barker. He's going to be hosting our tech support. So if you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat. And I would ask that everyone mute themselves if you're not speaking. Just wanted to let you know, many of you have probably been wondering, like, what's going on with this driving thing here in the city? Uh-oh. It sounds like Ben just told me my sound was breaking up, so I apologize. Many of you have asked what's going on with the driving in the city. So we are going to be hosting, along with quite a few friends and neighbors, we will be hosting a reckless driving event. It's a call to action, a roundup in Sherman Park on Saturday, November 6th. And that will be at 12 noon. So we invite each and every one of you to come and participate, because we do want to gather around this issue. And in addition to that, we will be signing some petitions and really moving forward on reckless driving. We do want to make sure that we engage our alderpersons and the common council, as well as the mayor, around this issue. So we hope you will join us. Again, that's going to be on Saturday, November 6th at 12 noon in Sherman Park, the park itself. So with all of that being said, I'm going to turn this over to Steve O'Connell, and he can get started with his presentation. So thank you, Steve, and take it away.
Thank you, Mabel. So Ben, you all set for me? Okay. So Ben, are you gonna turn it over to me, or are you gonna keep the things going for me?
I'll have to control it.
Okay, good. So this evening, we want to begin to look at how you move from production to hibernation. And there's three things about a garden. The gardens themselves begin in the spring to come around as the frost leaves the soil, et cetera, and the worms return to the soil. And then you are off and running, planting your garden and things of that nature. Throughout the season, you're beginning to basically enjoy the fruits of your production. And then you get to the end, and the whole thing is, how do you prepare your garden for next year? And so that's what we want to talk about tonight. So as we say, from production to hibernation. Okay. Next one, Ben. Okay, Lauren, you want to pick up here?
Yep. So the point we're coming at from here is essentially your garden is done. You've gotten about all you can harvest off of it. Maybe you had some green tomatoes that you're going to try to ripen inside or fry up, but there's really nothing else left on your plants. So the first thing you need to know is to look at your plants and make note if there's anything that had disease on it. It may be, some of it might have dried up already, because like squash vines, for example, dry up pretty easily, but try to remember if you had squash borers or if you ended up with a fungus on those plants and your tomatoes. If you had blight, that's a lot of times when there's a couple things that can cause black spots on the bottom of tomatoes, but blight is one of them. So if you have any diseased plants, you really don't want to work that back into the soil, because that just increases the chances that you're going to keep having disease. So if that's the case, you can just put them in the garbage. You can, it's mentioned here, you can bury it or get rid of it away from your garden, but my thought kind of is that in a city lot, there really isn't that much space away here for us. So if you have more land, then you can take that route, but it's best to just get it away. It's the same thing with like when you're doing your cleanup for the year, if you have a bunch of bad weeds, if you are able to let them go in a pile and really die off, then you can add them to your compost if you want. But generally it's best to not put that kind of stuff necessarily always in your compost pile. But let's say you have all your plants were healthy, you can chop them down, as it mentions here, chop up, just because if you put big things in your compost, it's going to take a long time for it to break down. If you have a pumpkin that went bad and you throw an entire pumpkin in your compost, it will break down, but you will have a large pumpkin chunk in there for a long time. So chop things up as much as you're able to before you throw it in your compost. If you don't keep compost, if you'd like to learn how to keep compost, you can go back to a previously recorded webinar that we've talked about with how to manage a compost pile. But if you don't have a compost, this kind of stuff can all be put in the city, in the street for the city to clean up. The city does have a website that you can look up. I know I looked up my address. The city said they were coming by October 20th and November 3rd, but I know the official dates that they run through are November 15th, but it seems like they always tend to push that out further because there's still a lot of leaves on the tree as of November 15th the last few years. And so that, I think, is that it for this slide? Can we go to the next one? But in the, just good pictures. So these are, they look to me like healthy plants. I don't know what the tomatoes on the tomato plants were like, but all the stuff you can just get out of your garden, cut it down. It looks like there's already straw there. So you can work it into your soil if you'd like to kind of like start with a bed. You can have straw. You can work in really any, I mean, all the leaves that fell, you can just leave those in your ground and work them in. You go to the next slide.
Can you back up just a sec, Lauren?
Oh, yep.
The good thing about this straw, I'm just pointing out, as you see, these are my straw bales and the tomato plants. That straw is already broken down. And
nice.
so there's no real weed seeds in there or anything. It's already composting. So that becomes my bed for next year. And so I lay that out. I raked it all out here. And you can see and how I've cleared it all out toward the compost piles. So that's basically composted straw bales.
So this is saying like, if your plants are healthy, you can till them into the garden. If you have, I think later on, there will be a picture of kind of like a chipper shredder. You can use to chop up drier material. If things are all wet, just make a mess. But larger fruits and vegetables, squashes, pumpkins, I tend to leave, like last year, I left some pumpkins out for a little while for squirrels to eat. This year I had pumpkins growing in my yard. If you walked by, you would notice that there was a pumpkin plant taking up half of the sidewalk. But I got 5 pumpkins that the squirrels planted. But those things you can either put in your compost or you can put them out into the street. So this is, the last point is, I think Steve, you did, is more for container gardening, right?
Yes,
So you can
exactly.
kind of like dump out your containers into the compost and it just gets a little fresher and it's kind of a head start. If it's already dirt, you're just kind of helping your compost along to make it through the winter.
And that's the next picture, Ben. And so here's one of the bags. And so I just take these are eggplants and just shake out the dirt into the actual composter, and then the rest of the dirt that's left in the bag. And then I stir that all in so that this is next year's compost getting ready. And so the dirt that was part of the plants this year, I just roll it all in there together. And as Lauren said, you refresh that dirt because it's in with good new compost. So that's a way to keep using that soil and refreshing it. So it doesn't go bad on you, as it were, lose its vitamins, as it were, vitality. Yeah, this is, I'm going to talk a little bit about chopping and reusing. One of the things, and Lauren was alluding to it, we really we can put the stuff along the side of the curb, et cetera, et cetera. But if you can avoid that and use it for compost, it's perfect. Or for us, all the leaves and everything from our 2 trees, we basically push back onto the raspberry plants after we cut the canes. And then we throw those leaves on the plants themselves and the flower gardens. So as Ann pulls up her flowers, then we throw those leaves on top of that. And so it becomes a natural bed. The other things is to chop them up. And you'll see in the next slide that I have a chopper. And it's real important with the chopper is to make sure that the stuff you're throwing through it isn't too thick. After you run it through the chopper, stir it up so that when you throw it onto the beds, it doesn't mat down. If it mats down, it freezes up over the base of your flowers. And that's one way to ruin your bulbs or to ruin the roots of like our raspberries. So the key is to make sure that as you chop that, you run your hands through it or rotate it with a pitchfork or something so that it's not all clumped together. And so the chopper, invaluable, is a way to clear up all those old materials that you have left, and then the leaves. So Ben, you want to just show the chopper? And this is an antique chopper, and I ain't kidding you, but it works. That's the key. These are leaves that I'm doing here right now. And then you can see I just run it into the bucket. I stir it all up, and then Ann's out there cutting the canes. And then as you see along the bottom of that, I throw down the materials that I just chopped. And so it becomes natural, organic cover. And it breaks down through the winter. It's amazing the difference it's made in those canes the last 3 or 4 or 5 years where we've been really pushing those leaves on top of that. And then where I used to garden, I'd get some horse manure and throw it on top of there. And that's really made those canes much more sturdy, and they really produce. It's pretty amazing. So that's the chopper. And then you can see on the side of the chopper in the driveway, stuff that just isn't going through the chopper. That's the stuff that goes to the curb. And as you see, it's not much after you go through all that stuff. So, okay. Now, the soil test, this is really crucial. Vegetables take a lot of nutrients out of the soil. And so every once in a while, it's important for you, all of us, to realize that your garden soil is depleted by your plants. And so every once in a while, it's important to do a soil test. And the second point is really good. It reveals if you have problems in your soil, if you have deficient nutrient levels, low organic materials, or high pH. And high pH is one of those things that really will limit your vegetable growth. And so it's important to test your soil. And the fall is a good time to do it because your soil has really been used during that growing season. And so you'll really get a sense if your soil has been depleted. And then they'll send it back to you with a write out as to what you need. And off you go to the garden center. Do you need compost? Do you need, say, some manure? Or do you need a granulated fertilizer? And the soil tests give you a lot of good hints as to how high your pH is, how to lower it, what fertilizers to use, et cetera, et cetera. The other thing I do is, and we missed it before, but I have a mound of soil that I keep on the side, and it's basically my garden, my mound garden. And I throw the soil and compost in there periodically, and I roll that over. And then in the spring, I use that as my soil additive. So that's had the whole winter of 1 year of growing, 1 year of materials that I've added to it, and then some of the buckets that I dump on there, and I've turned it over. And so that becomes a really good soil additive for the next year. And it's really natural. And that soil is perfect in the spring. So that's usually my mound. And that's right along the side of my garden. This year I just have pumpkins in there, nothing more. Some years I put potatoes in there, some years peppers. But after that, the peppers especially, I redo the soil. I throw some fertilizer in there and things of that nature. It just takes a lot, as I said at the top, it takes a lot of nutrients out. So that's a soil test. Any questions on soil tests? Because a lot of people ask questions about that. Okay, the next one gives us how to get a soil test. And it's basically the University of Wisconsin Soil and Forage Laboratory. And you request a little bag. They'll send you the little bag, little box. Go out and just dig your soil up, throw it in your bag, and then send it on to them. And then they'll send you a little write-up as to what you need. And there's a learning store. Lauren, do you use it very often?
I have not used it, no.
Oh, unbelievably good resource. Everything you want to know is in the learning store. The UW Extension, it's out of Madison, and it is amazing, the material they have there for you. Mary, you've done a lot of trees and stuff. Have you used the learning store? Mary, you're still muted. There you go.
Yes, I've used the learning store for berry bushes.
Yeah.
For elderberry and raspberry and grape and yeah, yes, and they were very helpful. I'm really, really helpful.
Yeah, they are, aren't they?
Mhm.
Pretty amazing the materials they have, and step by step how to do things.
Yes.
That's pretty amazing. Anybody else use the learning store, UW Extension? And have you used it? No, it's pretty amazing. It's a great resource. So there's the link to it.
Steve, does the UW Soil and Forage Lab charge for that soil test?
It's not a lot.
Okay.
I think the last time it did it was like $8, something like that. It's not very expensive. It's mostly just for the shipping back and forth. Your little box and your little bag. I picked it up. The one time I picked it up at the UW Extension, the garden thing out at the county grounds. I ran over there and got the bag in the little box. And that was for free. So it was just a matter of sending it in, and then they sent me a little report back. So you can do it that way too. The local extension has the little box and bag. So you can go that direction too, if you wish. That's a good question, though, Ann. Okay, Ben. Lauren, you want to pick up here? Do the cover crops and covers? You're muted.
Mute
There
would
you
be
go.
helpful. So there are a couple options to kind of, I mean, you don't want to just leave a bunch of exposed dirt in your yard. A lot of that can wash away. I'm more often the kind to take what I call the lazier route, which would be a straw cover, just because it's easier. You don't have to worry as much about timing and weather and watering and things. So also, like you saw in Steve's photos, he did some straw bale gardening. So if you do that, you already have a bunch of straw on hand that you just have to kind of spread out and cover your ground with. You can also go and purchase garden cloth for it, so that it has to be a porous garden cloth. You can't get the ones that are like plastic. It has to be the kind that allows water to seep through. But you can also plant a cover crop. At the prior farm that I was involved in, actually, they would always do a clover cover crop, and they would plant their, I mean, they had a 2-acre field, but in whatever your garden area is, clover seed is a very affordable seed, especially for the scale that you'd need in a yard, or a garden bed or whatever. And so they would always plant clover, and then they would only till the rows that they were planting. In between the rows, they would actually leave planted in clover. So that's an option too. They found that there was less damage from mice and other things that like to eat, because they like to eat clover more than they like to eat the little shoots that started growing out for the new baby plants. And that's obviously, I mean, continuing the cover crop into the springtime. But that's a good way to just keep the soil firm. You got to get some, either cover it up or get some roots in it so that it doesn't start to wash away and have open soil out. And what's this last one?
The covers.
Oh, what do you mean by hot plates?
Oh,
I don't know if I know.
well, the next picture will show you what I mean.
Okay.
I cover the gardens, and then I start my fall crops. So I've got lettuces and radishes and things of that nature. And as time comes along, it gets cold. So I put little hot plates in there, and I keep it going. So I keep the soil warm with literally like little coffee hot plates that you
Okay.
put your cup on. Or I got a big one that you put dishes on, like for hot dishes. And I put that in there also. And that keeps the soil warm. And I can go, sometimes I get mid-January.
Wow.
Lettuces and greens going in there with my little hot plates. So the next slide will show you what I mean. Oh, you know what? Ann, do you want to pick up here? Because you had some of these are some of your great ideas before we get to my covers.
Sure. Yeah, I kind of learned this from Groundwork Milwaukee, to lay cardboard on your garden bed. Like for me, I've got 2 raised garden beds in the back, and you can either piece pieces of boxes, break them down and just piece them all together so it covers the garden, the dirt. Or if you can, like I just got a new furnace, I used the box that came with the furnace and it fit perfectly right on the garden bed. And then but you know, you've got to make sure the box is not waxy, that it doesn't have a lot of glue and stickers, and that doesn't have the tape on it. Kind of secure it with some rocks and bricks, and then throw some straw on top. I find that if I put straw, I have limited access to some good straw. So I'll put the straw on top of the cardboard, or I'll open up paper bags. I'll cut paper bags from the grocery store and lay them out flat and put the straw on top of that. That way the seeds that are in the straw that I buy, like from Menards or whatever store sells that kind of stuff, doesn't germinate into the soil. And then in the spring, I can just pull that stuff off the garden and kind of lay it on the side, and it actually becomes a kind of a nice walkway around the edge of the garden. It's still suppressing the weeds that might grow outside the garden bed. And like previously that was mentioned, you can get garden cloths. It will work well. So, and even with the cardboard, the moisture will seep in. The cardboard will kind of break down. It'll get wet, and it will keep the soil moist. I'm not familiar with the grommeted plant cover. I use, like I've got a couple of lavender plants growing in the back, and so I'll wrap them with what do you call it, burlap,
Mhm.
so that it's got some breathing room in there. But then I'll shore it up with some straw around the base to keep them protected from the winter, because if there is no snow cover consistently, they won't be happy. And sometimes in the spring, there's an ice storm of some kind, and they're not happy with that. So I have a lot of good luck covering my lavender plants with that.
And
So, and then if Steve, you want to talk about the grommeted plant
Yeah, the
cover? and then-
grommeted is the little tie downs around the outside of it. So
Oh,
it's a round cover that goes around your plants. And then they're like little pins that go down into the soil. And so it holds it down and it protects it. And it's a little heavier plastic cover. Gardens Alive and Gardens, any of the garden catalogs have these covers, especially for sensitive plants. Like you mentioned, Ann, that you want them to really be encapsulated. Bushes, a lot of people use these for bushes, especially where rabbits, rodents are going to chew on the bushes. So Lauren, you've seen these, haven't you, out where you guys were, where you have
Yeah.
little trees?
Yeah, and what it is nice that they're reusable products. So like, yes, it is something you're having to buy, but you can get a few years out of them.
Oh, yeah, exactly.
And
And
the
of
other
course,
and the
yeah,
other thing too about if I use burlap to cover something, I will try to wash it in the spring somehow,
yeah.
just so that the next fall, when I wrap it around, there isn't some kind of disease or some weird weed seed that got in there, just to keep everything real clean for the next season.
And you bring up something very important. Once we dump out all of our dirt and everything, it is important to throw your buckets and your bags into a soapy, bleachy water to kill off any fungus that you might have or any disease, and then let that dry out in the mine or in the garage. So they dry out over the winter, so that if you have any pathogens, they're not growing during the winter in the dampness and that type of thing. So a very light bleach water or a very light vegetable detergent, just to make sure their pathogens aren't hanging on your plant, either your 5-gallon buckets or any types of things that you use for your plants. So always clean them up. So that's important. So,
And
and you're
same
going to
thing
say,
with same thing with all your gardening tools
yeah,
that you
I'm-
use, your trowels, your anything you cut plants with.
yeah, I'm going to bring that up at the end. I added that at the end, and
Okay.
it came to me yesterday. I forgot to put it in here. Okay, let's just jump to my covers. You'll see what they look like. The girls call them the Conestoga wagons. It's basically a PVC pipe with the little zipper down the middle, so that you can keep those very warm. And then those are actually Gardener Supply. These are the new ones. It's a kind of a plastic, but a little bit more than plastic. And so the sun gets through there real gently. So you get sun all the time in the winter when it gets really cold, and just keep them closed. And then you can open them as far as you want, all the way up, full sun, or if you just want partial sun, or if it's raining and there's not a lot of wind, you can just open them and get natural wind and rain in there. So those are the covers that I use, and I think they're all covered. There's one over here on this side that I've got covers for too. So 100, Barb, you're 100. Oops, I'm sorry. Oh yeah, okay. That's great. Thanks, Barb. That's a great idea. Wow. So Barb, you use those just as bags, or do you shred them up, cut them up? Barb? So we'll contact her to get them if you want, people want, oh, just as bags. Okay. Okay, that's great. Thank you. Thank you, thank you.
I would imagine too that these raised garden covers you're showing would be good in the spring if you want to get a really early start on spinach and lettuce and the greens and things.
And a perfect segue. This is perfect for starting your spring garden. And I'm starting, sometimes I already have stuff ready by Easter. Because I start already early March, because you get enough heat in there and it dries out naturally as during the winter, and it doesn't freeze that hard. And so it's ready to go very early in March. And then those things just warm up naturally. And then you can just open them a little bit during the day if it gets too warm, and then close them up at night when it gets so chilly. And then of course the hot plates, just keep it warm enough in there so they don't freeze or get damaged by frost. So, okay, weed management. Lauren, you want to jump in here? This is our
Sure.
problem.
Yeah. Yeah, kind of a continuation. As anyone probably knows, weeding is a often and always process. I did pretty well for my yard with the weeds this year until the last month and a half, and now I got some little bit bigger weeds to manage, so I need to take these steps into account. Weeds make a lot of seeds. Weeds like to proliferate, and it's best if you can pull them while they're young before they make those seeds, but we know that it's not always possible. I would say if you're pulling weeds and you notice they have active seeds on them, probably put them in plastic bags, because then the seeds aren't spreading. Because if you're putting them in your compost, it's unlikely that it's probably going into the winter going to get hot enough to kill them. And so then you're just going to be spreading these weeds around your yard everywhere, which you don't want. And if you put them into the street, then you're probably also just spreading those weeds around your neighborhood, because they're just going to sit there and blow their seeds all over. So I don't like contributing to garbage, but weeds are just something that sometimes you just got to put it in the garbage. And as this last note, you might not think of this, but weeds can survive the winter. They're pretty hardy. They're drought tolerant. They're pretty strong plants. So making sure that you get weeds controlled now, like don't just chop down your garden, actually take the time. Like you don't need it to look pretty anymore, but you'll like yourself better next year. And if you are able to do a last round of weeding before you cover all your garden up at the end of the year.
And I think that's a good point. Our header, it is a growing disaster waiting to happen in the spring. If you're not on top of it, it's just going to fester when you hit the spring. And thing that I've noticed, sometimes they're up before you even get a chance to get out there and start to look at the soil. There's weeds growing already on you. So they're a pestilence. Okay. Now, this is a serious issue, and this is kind of an issue across the country, not just us, but farmers, to till or not to till. And this is a whole thing now. There are areas in the country where they are planting without tilling. People planting, when I was out in North Dakota, planting spring wheats and their hardy wheats without tilling. They had really gone away from spreading those weeds all over the place. So it's not really necessary for you to till in the fall, and hoeing, et cetera, et cetera. It really disturbs the soil structure. And if you have some really good natural soil organisms in there and you start hoeing and tilling, you're just going to mix that all around. And the other thing is that second issue is erosion. That's another way to start erosion. When you loosen up that soil and then the winds start coming over the top, and then your dirt's going to start blowing into people's yards or just disappearing on you. And it also spreads the weeds. The second thing is, don't forget our worms. We talked about in composting. When you take your composting dirt, a lot of times it's pretty free of worms, but not necessarily. And you're mixing it in with good soil, the worms start to come back there. And you start tilling, you basically are cutting up your worms. And so that's something you really got to avoid, you have to avoid and steer clear of. And then you can do some hoeing and tilling if you are adding soil amendments or your leftover plant materials. So if you're trying to turn that stuff in, yes, you can do tilling for that reason, because you're incorporating your new amendments, and so you're rolling it in. So to till or not to till, it just depends on basically what your method is and why you're doing it, that type of thing. Lauren, what about you guys out at the garden, the farm? Do you till or what in the fall?
We did this first year because we took an area that had not been farmed before and made it
Oh,
into vegetable crops. So, but the plan is to till as little as possible.
Yeah. Yeah, the whole thing is to allow your soil to compost rather than disturbing it and turning it over, et cetera, et cetera. And you do want to cut down on erosion. The wind and the rain, you lose a lot of soil if it's not basically taken care of. So to till or not to till, always keep that in the back of your mind when you're looking at your garden.
I have a
Any
question.
comments on that, Ann?
Yeah, I have a question about that.
Yeah.
I don't like to dig into my garden when I put the soil amendment, but I think you have to
Yeah.
do a little bit to get it to work its way in, but
Yeah.
how deep would you say is a good depth to go before you're not really disturbing worms or the soil structure?
I have one of those little forks. It's about 3 inches. That's as far down as I go.
Okay,
So that little thing that I use and I pull across the soil, I only go down that far. I don't go any further because I've noticed a couple of times I've gone down a little bit, just rooting around, and there are the worms looking up at me, literally. All of a sudden you're on top of those worms. So about 3 inches, I go down the length of my little till thing, but not much more than that because the worms are down there. I just did something over at the church where we have our blessing box, and we scraped the soil to put in some little pads to keep people's feet dry during the winter when they walk up to the box. And I think we went down 2 inches and there were worms right going through the soil and little wormholes. So they're right there. They're down about 2 inches, give or take. So yeah, about 3 inches at the most. But that's a good question, Ann, because a lot of times you don't think about it. But you go down, you'll see them. You see little holes too, especially in the clay, our clay soil. So that's a good thing, just kind of keep in the back of your mind. It's a good question though. Okay, next one, Ben. Okay, rain barrels. Lauren, this is all yours. Another lover of rain barrels.
I learned this lesson the hard way last year.
Oh, that's right.
How to not manage your rain barrels. So this year, for any of you that have rain barrels, you probably noticed that this year they didn't fill up very much at the beginning of the year because we had no rain. And I planted so much this year that anytime we got rain in them, after a day or two, I used it all already. But end of the year, I mean, we've been watering a little bit less. So first step is you need to get all the water out of your rain barrel. I actually have a bunch of, my mom had saved like gallon milk jugs for me for when I first had a deep freezer. We filled them up with water just to fill up space. And now I don't need them for that, but I kept the jugs around, and I fill all the jugs that I have with the rainwater and keep it in my basement and use it to water my indoor plants. I mean, I use it to water my indoor plants year round, but in the wintertime, it's really great. They like rainwater. They especially, I would say, generally don't like tap water unless you're leaving it sit out to get the chlorine out of it. But if you have a rain barrel and you have something to keep it in, ask all your neighbors, just find some jugs to put it in. It's a really good way to help empty out some of your barrel Otherwise, I mean, you'll just have to get it drained into the sewer, drained in the street. Either way, you need to empty out your barrels. I would say, after you empty them, there's always gonna be a little bit of scum on your rain barrels. And you could spray it out with a hose if you want to while it's still damp, but at some point, you're gonna need to flip them over and let them dry out. If you can find it, if you can do it while there's still some good sunny days, that's helpful. And store them for the winter. It's best if you're able to store them either upside down or have a cover on them so that water can't get in them. It's best if they don't have any water in them so that ice can't freeze in it during the winter time. The other part of disconnecting your rain barrel, there are a couple ways, like some have where the downspout directly feeds into the top of the rain barrel. I have the diverter kit that the MMSD gives out, where you cut a hole in your gutter and you put in a little rubber thing that hugs the sides of your gutter. And it does still have a hole in the middle for things to drain, but if you don't take that out in the wintertime, that causes an ice dam inside your downspout. And that's the part that I forgot to do last year. They give you a flat plastic plate to put on your downspout to replace that, which is what you need to have on in the wintertime, because you need your gutters to be completely full. Otherwise, you will be like me after in the middle of the winter sometime, and you have to go out to your gutter with a heat gun and melt all of the ice above so you can get the rubber piece out of the gutter, because when it's all frozen with ice, it's not flexible anymore and it won't come out of because the hole's only about this big and you have to squeeze it in. So take your rubber pieces out of your gutter. Don't let them freeze with ice in them. Steve, you have the other kind, right? Do you
Yes,
have
I
any
have
special
the,
steps for the ones that drain right into your barrels?
Yeah. And what I do is I set it up in such a way, I've got hoses, big hoses, and I hook it right up and attach it right to the, where it actually would go into the rain barrel. We'll look at it in a second. And then I run the water right out into the yard.
Right.
So I'm getting fresh rainwater during the winter or runoff from the roof. And so I keep that in the yard, and get away from your foundation.
Hey, just make sure it doesn't all fall right there next to your house, because
Got that right. So mine's, oh man, mine's out toward the middle, but don't put it in the street, because I've seen too many people doing that. It freezes in the alleys, it freezes in the street, freezes in the gutter. So you don't really want to run any of your water off into the street. Our goal is to keep this water out of the freshwater sewers. So that's our goal. And so if you can drain it into your yard, that's perfect. And honestly, it's never frozen. I've never noticed like an ice rink out in the backyard where I run it out, well, front and back. Never had a problem. So let's look at, Ben, the rain barrels. You can see what they look like. This one, the Wisconsin one, that one goes directly into the rain barrel itself. And so that little coupling right down below is the runoff hose. You can't see it, but I just hook that together and it runs off into the front yard. And then these two, you can see the brewer one and the barrel one. I hook right up to the where it runs into the barrel, and any of the hardware stores have that piece that goes to that, and just screw it together. And they actually hook right together, and then you can run whatever hose you want off of the end of the downspout. And so that's how I run it off into the yard. And you can see where my hoses go off into the yard. The rain barrel, that actually waters the raspberry plants. So all the water that comes out of the rain barrel goes into the raspberry plants themselves. And in the winter, I do the same thing. I run the water off into the raspberry plants. So I try to get the water away from the house type of thing. So those are the rain barrels, and I have 5 of them. And this year, and Lauren, you're right, I've run out of water twice with 5 rain barrels. That tells you how dry it's been. I seldom run out of water. but twice this summer, and it's a pretty dry summer for the garden.
So Steve, do you not take your rain barrels and turn them upside down and put them in a spot in your house for the winter? You just,
They're right on the back porch, right
Oh,
in the patio. I got them all stacked up.
okay,
Yeah, never let those things sit there like that, because Lord, you get ice in the bottom of those things, they split. And it is amazing the force of that ice in those things. If you let that water freeze in there. So when I get to the end of the season, I drain out what I need. The rest I pour out in the yard, clean them out, and I let them sit on the sidewalk for about 3 or 4 days, let the sun just dry them out. They're always upside down. I never leave them so any water can get in them. And I just stack them on the back porch. And it works out fine. I've not had any problems. But you got to be careful with them, because a number of the neighbors, when we put in all those rain barrels a number of years ago, I kept reminding people and they would forget. And then rain barrels all cracked. I said, well, you let the ice freeze in there. The water just froze up on you and it just splits them open. So you got to be real careful with your rain barrels. But once you get used to them, the garden, Lauren, you're right. Those plants love that water. They do not like chlorinated water. It makes a huge difference all summer too. They love that. They don't like the chlorinated. They don't like you sprinkling hose water on it. They want that fresh water. So
Yeah.
it's a godsend. Any comments on rain barrels? Oh, okay, can you store in the, oh yes. I've done that in the past, throw them in the garage. As long as they're upside down after you drain them out. Garage is a good place for them.
And I do leave mine in place. I just make sure that they're upside down, but
Yeah,
they're still
I-
out on the side of my house. So
I-
you can leave them outside. You just can't let any water get in.
Yeah, I did notice that. You always have yours right alongside the house.
Yep.
But yeah, you inside or out, as long as they're upside down, keep the water out of them. Okie dokie. Okay, Ann, why don't you love the clay pots? Why don't you talk about the clay pots?
yeah.
They're cool though. They're a cool.
I've
thing.
had good success with clay pot irrigation. It's a very old technique, goes back to Egypt, the old days of Egypt. And I was thinking this summer, with all of the drought events and all of the water I was running from my faucet to water my garden, I'm going to use more clay pots, because what you do is you take the clay pots and you sink them into the dirt. This is like just the short explanation. I'll get into it a little bit more, but, and then you plant the plants like not more than a foot away from each pot. They can even be closer. And then you fill the pot to the top, put a cover on so that the mosquitoes can't lay eggs, and so that it doesn't, what is it called? Evaporate.
Yeah, evaporates.
And the roots of the plants, they take what they need from the pots. It's a scientific thing where when the soil dries out and the pot is wet, there's some kind of a suction thing that happens and it waters the roots underneath. So you have to start with terracotta pots. They cannot be glazed. I use 7 and 10-inch pots. Those are good options. You can get a lot of plants around a 10-inch pot. Of course, always remembering that when you plant, you're leaving enough space for the plants to grow and get big. And you fill the little hole at the bottom with silicone glue. It comes in a tube, and you put some all over the hole in the bottom, and then on the inside on the bottom. Let it dry for a while. Fill it with some water in a sink, and if water is still leaking out the bottom, then let it dry off, and then add more glue until there are no leaks coming out of the bottom there. I have used cork in the past to stop the hole, but the cork really breaks down kind of mid-season, and the pot is running out of water more quickly. You can't use it for root vegetables, because in the root vegetable, the root is what you're going to harvest, and you don't want that being ruined by the clay pot irrigation. So I know tomatoes love it. Anything above ground where you're harvesting above ground, they're really good for that. So you essentially bury the pot right up to the top, like maybe this far from the top. Get it really wet. What I'll do is I'll take my pots out after I've cleaned them really well with a, you can even use a slight bleach, a weak bleach water combination, and just scrub it all out, or even vinegar, scrub it all out and get it nice and clean. It's best to do it this fall so that they're ready to go in the spring. And so, like, as Steve mentioned, there aren't any, what is it called? Any kind of,
Pathogens?
yeah, any kind of pathogens on there that are ruining and then may carry on to the next growing season. Keep them all real clean. And then you fill them about this high, put a cover on. But what I do is when I take them out of the basement for the spring, I'll fill them all in my yard. I'll set them out in my yard, fill them all up, make sure no leaks have formed over the winter. And if there's a crack on the side of the pot, you really don't want to use that pot. And then after I'm sure that nothing's really leaking, I'll empty them, bury them in the soil. You bury them first, and then you plant the plants around it. I think you can start with seeds around it, but you just want to make sure that you're leaving enough room for the plants to grow properly. And then the plants will just slurp up the water as they need it, as they get dry. I think I watered my tomato plant maybe once or twice this summer from the top, like just right at the soil. But mainly I'll go and look at take the covers off my clay pots. If they're running low or dry, I'll just fill them with the water, and you can definitely use the water if you have a rain barrel, because that way you're using rainwater, and they love rainwater. I don't have a rain barrel, so I was just using my hose. Sorry, I was using my hose. But I decided that next year I'm just going to use it more. I'm going to use it for all of my plants except for the root vegetables. So, but it's really a good system to use.
Well, and also that method would allow the chlorine to dissipate, so you're not necessarily actually watering your plants with the chlorinated water.
Okay.
Because after 24 hours, if you just let water sit, the chlorine will all be gone. I don't remember what the exact time is, but I know after a day it's all gone. So,
Yeah,
But
pretty
do you
much
have to
20
have the cover off though for it to dissipate?
no, it just has to be sitting.
Oh, okay. Yeah,
It's
this
about
question that you've seen it
24
done
hours.
with water bottles and to put holes, there are a lot of different varieties. If you search on Google for YouTube methods of irrigating, I don't know what you'd call it, not clay pot irrigation, but anyway, there are a lot of different varieties. So
Isn't that the passive irrigation?
could be.
I think.
But then, that way you're not standing there wondering, did I give this plant enough water? Did I overwater? You're using your water bill's going up because you're running your hose so much, but so you're just filling in these pots as they get low, and it's just so easy.
Yeah, that's great. Ben, you want to show a picture of it? There you go.
And you want to make sure when you bury the pot that the soil around it is loose and really it's not this heavy clay stuff, so that the water can easily seep into the roots of the plant that you planted near it. I've heard some people say that when they dig up their clay pot in the fall, the roots of the plant are like wrapped around it.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah, exactly.
So, but yeah, it's a good method for future gardening, especially with the droughts. They're probably going to be more and more droughts.
That's true. Okay, next one. So now we're going to be thinking a little bit more about the next productive season. You know what, Ann, you want to talk a little bit about crop rotation?
Sure. This has kind of been, since I started gardening in Milwaukee, and I've got some friends who garden, it's just been kind of drummed into my head, never plant in the same spot every year. So at the end of the growing season, I'll actually draw a map of where I had stuff planted, especially tomato plants. You don't want them in the same spot because, like Steve said, you're depleting the soil as you plant there. And as you keep planting the same thing in the same spot, it just gets worse. So because I draw a map at the end of the summer, because by the time spring rolls around, I never remember. Where did I plant my tomato plant? I don't know. So, and it just helps for the next growing season, knowing where to plant the things you always plant every summer. Like I plant a lot of stuff, same stuff every summer. So I just kind of move them around the garden.
And then seed savers. Lauren, do you guys do seed saving out at the farm?
This current farm, we are not, but at the last farm that I was involved with, we actually had some seed savers that were involved in our project. They are still around in Wisconsin. They're called Cultivating the Commons. If you want some local saved seeds, there are some crops that, I mean, because they're seed saving for their business, it's very important. They had to go around and survey the neighboring farms to find out what they were growing to make sure they wouldn't have cross pollination. They had to hand pollinate some plants. So there are some things that are easier to save seeds on than others. Certain things like I know when I lived in Bayview, one of my housemates was a master gardener and she was the one in charge of keeping our seeds for the next year. And so she would just always flag one of our plants and say, if this has this little string on it, you're not allowed to pick it. So we had to follow her rules about which things were allowed to go to seed. And so I wasn't as involved in the actual collecting of the seed process, but generally when you are saving seeds, you want to make sure that you get them dried out really well and that they're stored well. So that way you have a better germination rate for the next year. One thing that I thought was really fun at my last farm, they actually had success with seeding kale. So kale is it called a biannual? It's a 2-year plant. And the problem with it here is that getting to keep it alive through a winter so that it can make it to the second year so that you can get the seed from it. And they were able to manage it with, I think they used a hoop house for in between seasons, but I think they also kept the kale in a cooler. Like they dug it up and kept it in a cooler and were able to get it to go dormant and replant it again. And it was good for the next year. So it was fascinating to see, but there's people who do pretty amazing things with saving seeds.
Any of you listen to Garden Talk on Friday on public radio, Wisconsin Public Radio? Never listen to that week when they have the seed savers on. You'll be so driven to distraction. These people that call in, the seed that I've been saving for 43 years is still alive. But seed savers are their bunch. There are a ton of websites about seed saving. The big seed savers are in Iowa. There's a huge colony of them in Iowa. And they some of them call in and they're kind of a treat to listen to, but oh mercy, they're serious. And of course, seed catalogs. And actually, I got the first one yesterday, even before Thanksgiving. Jung Seeds. I'm thinking, what? This early? What's going on here? So, and they're always great to just look at, and they're just kind of fun. Okay, next one. Ben. This is our last one for the evening. Just a word about tools. And you're right, it's so important. You got to have them clean. Make sure all the dirt, any clutter that's wrapped around them. So make sure those tools are clean. Hose them off or whatever. And then always